She had a 4.0 grade point average. She never missed a shift at work. She wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. And on the night of July 5th, 2012, she climbed out of her bedroom window to meet the two people she trusted most in the world, and she never came back. This is not a story about a stranger in the dark. It is not a story about someone who could have seen danger coming from a distance. This is a story about a 16-year-old girl who was murdered by the two people she called her best friends. Girls she had known for years, girls she had laughed with and shared secrets with and built her teenage life alongside. Girls who, while her parents were posting missing person flyers and sobbing through interviews, were going to school, posting on social media and living as though nothing had happened because they had planned it that way. Because they had prepared for exactly that possibility long before the night it happened. The name is Skylar Neese, born February 10th, 1996, in Star City, West Virginia. And the story of what happened to her, the planning, the deception, the investigation, the collapse, and the confession that finally answered the question her family had been living with for 6 months, is one of the most documented and studied cases of adolescent violence in recent American history. A case that changed West Virginia law. A case that is now the subject of a major Hulu documentary series. And a case that forces everyone who examines it to sit with a question that has no comfortable answer. How well do we actually know the people we trust with our lives? Before we go further, if this is the kind of investigation you want to follow, the kind that examines what the headlines skip and takes the evidence seriously from start to finish, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. New cases, covered completely, every week. And leave a comment below. When you hear a case like this, what is the detail that stays with you the longest? Tell me in the comments. Let's build this from the beginning. The way it has to be built, starting not with the crime, but with the person at the center of it. Skylar Neese grew up in Star City, West Virginia, a small suburb of Morgantown, the university town in the northern part of the state best known as home to West Virginia University. She was the only child of Dave and Mary Neese, and by the account of everyone who knew her, her parents, her teachers, her classmates, her aunt Carol Michaud, she was exactly the kind of teenager who makes a parent believe in the future. She maintained a 4.0 GPA at University High School in Monongalia County while working part-time shifts at a nearby Wendy's restaurant. She was outgoing and loyal and full of plans. Her aunt remembered her as a natural debater who talked about becoming a criminal defense attorney. Her father described her as someone with a big heart. Skylar was very loyal to her friends, he said, the people she thought were her friends. That loyalty is not an incidental detail in this story. It is the center of it, because the two people Skylar was most loyal to, the two people she had built her closest friendships around, were building something else entirely. In the months before she disappeared, the first was Shelia Ray Eddy, born September 20th, 1995, in Blacksville, West Virginia. Shelia and Skylar had known each other since they were 8 years old. They met at a local children's activity program called The Shack and grew up together through middle school. When Shelia's mother remarried in 2010 and the family relocated to Morgantown, Shelia began attending University High School alongside Skylar. The friendship, already almost a decade old, deepened further. They had been friends since they were 8 years old, Skylar's mother, Mary Neese, said in the Hulu documentary. They were inseparable. The second was Rachel Elizabeth Shoaf, born June 10th, 1996, in Morgantown. Rachel had attended a private Catholic school before high school. When she transferred to University High School, she met both Eddie and Neese, and the three girls formed a tight social circle. They were frequently seen together at school, driving around town late at night, spending time at each other's homes. From the outside, it was exactly what it appeared to be, A typical high school friendship between three girls who were close in age and comfortable with one another. But beneath that surface, during their sophomore year, something was changing. Shelia, Eddie, and Rachel Shoaf had developed a romantic relationship, one they kept secret from the people around them. As that relationship intensified, the dynamic within the friend group began to shift in ways that Skylar felt directly. She was being excluded. The social geometry of the friendship had changed, and she was on the outside of a new arrangement she did not fully understand. What she did understand was that something was wrong between her and her closest friends. And in the way that teenagers in 2012 communicated those feelings, she said so publicly on Twitter. In the days before she disappeared, Skylar posted messages that investigators would later examine with great care. One post reading, "Thanks, friends. Love hanging out with you all." 2. A day later, "You doing stuff like that is why I can never completely trust you." These posts were public. They were time-stamped. They were a real-time record of a fracture in a friendship that to people on the other side of that fracture had already decided to make permanent. Here is the problem that those tweets document when you understand what investigators later learned about the timeline. The tension visible in Skylar's posts was not news to Shelia, Eddie, and Rachel Shoaf. They had been aware of it. They had discussed it. And, according to Rachel Shoaf's later confession and court testimony, that tension had been part of a conversation between the two of them that had moved over the course of the preceding months from frustration to planning. They had become concerned that Skylar would reveal their secret relationship. The fear of exposure of their relationship becoming known in their school, in their community, had become, in the distorted thinking of two 16-year-old girls, a justification for what they decided to do after things became known with the relationship. "There was tension between us," Shoaf said in her 2023 parole testimony. "It was hostile and violent in our teenage minds. We didn't know how to handle the conflict, and we just wanted it to stop. They chose the most permanent way imaginable to stop it. And the planning that preceded the night of July 5th was not impulsive. It was not reactive. It was methodical in a way that the evidence documents precisely. Before they picked Skylar up, Shelia, Eddie had prepared the trunk of her car. Inside it, cleaning rags, bleach, wet wipes, a shovel, and fresh sets of clothing for each of them to change into afterward. They concealed knives in their clothing before they left. Every logistical detail of what was about to happen had been prepared in advance. Not in a moment of anger, not in the heat of conflict, but ahead of time, deliberately, with supplies gathered and a plan in place. On the night of July 5th, 2012, Skylar Neese returned home after a shift at Wendy's. She told her parents she was tired and was going to sleep. Her father, Dave, later recalled that the evening seemed normal, nothing that would have given any reason for alarm. But late that night, after her parents had gone to bed, Skylar climbed out of her bedroom window. She used a stool positioned under the window to make it easier. The surveillance camera at her apartment complex captured the moment at approximately 12:30 in the morning on July 6th. Skylar leaving through the window and getting into a light-colored sedan waiting outside. Shelia, Eddie's Toyota Camry. Rachel Shoaf was already in the passenger seat. Skylar did not take her phone charger. She did not take her contact lens solution. She left her window open behind her. All of these details, noted by her father the following morning, were consistent with someone who planned to return home. Someone who had no idea that the people in that car had been preparing for months to make sure she never did. They drove approximately 30 miles from Star City to a remote area in Wayne Township, Greene County, Pennsylvania, a location across the state border that all three of them knew from previous visits. A place they had been together before on other occasions, which is why the invitation to go there that night seemed unremarkable to Skylar. Familiar ground. They got out of the car. According to Shoaf's confession, she and Eddie told Skylar they had forgotten to bring a lighter. Skylar offered to go back to the car to get one. She turned her back to them. They counted to 3. What followed was an attack that ended Skylar Neese's life. The autopsy would later document more than 50 stab wounds across her neck, back, torso, and both hands. She was 16 years old. After the attack, the 2 girls attempted to conceal the body in the wooded area, covering it with branches, dirt, and leaves. They had planned to bury Skylar with the shovel, but the ground was too rocky, so they left her there, covered, in the woods beside a large tree, and they returned to the car. They changed out of their clothing. They used the cleaning supplies they had brought to remove physical evidence. And then they drove to Blacksville, the town where Shelia had grown up, to dispose of additional evidence from the night. Then they went home. And then, the next morning, the performance began. When Dave Neese woke on the morning of July 6th and noticed that Skylar's bedroom door was locked, something she rarely did, and received no response when he knocked, he forced the door open. The bed had not been slept in. The window was open. The stool was outside. Skylar was gone. Dave contacted his wife, Mary, who was at work. At first, she hoped Skylar might simply be out with friends. She began calling people who might know where her daughter was. When she reached Shelia Eddie, Shelia said she did not know where Skylar was. The family waited, hoping Skylar would come home in time for her shift at Wendy's that afternoon. When the restaurant called to ask if she was coming in, and Skylar, who was described by everyone who knew her as someone who always showed up for work, Dit not Apia, Dave Neese contacted the Star City Police Department to report his daughter missing. Officer Jessica Colbank of the Star City Police Department was assigned to the case. One of her first investigative steps was interviewing Skylar's parents and beginning to establish a timeline of her last known movements. Shortly after the disappearance was reported, Shelia Eddie arrived at the Neese family home with her mother. She told the family she and Rachel had picked Skylar up late the previous night, that the 3 of them had driven around together, and that they had dropped Skylar back off around midnight. It was a simple story, plausible. It gave an explanation for where Skylar had been after she left through the window, and it ended with Skylar safely returned home. But the security camera footage from the apartment complex told a different story. Not just the footage of Skylar leaving, but footage documenting the car's return. The timing did not match what Shelia and Rachel had described. The footage showed the sequence of events in a way that was inconsistent, with a simple late-night drive and a drop-off around midnight. That misalignment was the first crack in the story they were telling investigators. As the community mobilized, friends and classmates distributing posters, volunteers searching the area, investigators following up on possible sightings, the inconsistencies continued to accumulate. On July 12th, one tip suggested Skylar had been seen on a beach in North Carolina with 2 other girls. One with red hair, a description that matched Rachel Shoaf. Investigators contacted the church camp where Rachel was staying at the time. The lead was incorrect. Rachel was at camp, and her presence there gave her a ready-made alibi for the days immediately following Skylar's disappearance. She had been elsewhere, verifiably, which at first seemed to distance her from whatever had happened. But here is where the investigation becomes something more than the accumulation of early confusion and false leads. Approximately 6 weeks into the investigation, the FBI and the West Virginia State Police joined the case, and investigators began the methodical process of examining the digital evidence trail that Shelia Eddie and Rachel Shoaf had left behind without fully understanding its significance. 13 days after Skylar disappeared, Rachel returned to Morgantown from summer camp and was interviewed by investigators. Her account closely mirrored Shelia's version of events. The 3 girls had driven around. The night had been uneventful, and they had dropped Skylar off near her home. The stories were remarkably consistent. Too consistent. When detectives retraced the described route with Shelia, they discovered a specific directional discrepancy at a key intersection. Shelia said they had turned one direction while Rachel's account indicated the opposite direction on a major road that both girls would have traveled multiple times. The confusion was difficult to explain. Officer Colbank later said the similarity of the girls' written statements made it appear as if the story had been rehearsed, but the directional discrepancy suggested that the rehearsal had been imperfect. 3 weeks into the investigation, investigators began reviewing the teenagers' social media accounts in depth. Skylar's Twitter posts, the messages expressing frustration at being excluded and questioning a friend's trustworthiness, gave investigators a documented record of the tension within the friend group. Shelia's social media activity in the days after Skylar's disappearance was also revealing in its own way. She was posting about her daily life, her friendship with Rachel, her ordinary routines, as though nothing unusual had happened. Investigators noted this as behaviorally inconsistent with someone who was genuinely distressed about a missing friend. Several months into the investigation, a critical development emerged from the analysis of phone records. Investigators obtained records for both Shelia's and Rachel's phones and discovered that on the night Skylar disappeared, both phones had been in Blacksville, West Virginia at approximately 4 a.m. This directly contradicted the girls' claim that they had been asleep at home after dropping Skylar off. Phone location data placing to key witnesses in an unexpected location at 4 a.m. Hours after they claimed to have returned home was a significant evidentiary development. It proved the girls' timeline was false. It established they had been somewhere specific in the early morning hours that they had not disclosed, and it directed investigators to review traffic and surveillance footage from the route between Morgantown and Blacksville at a Sheetz gas station equipped with high-resolution cameras. Investigators identified a vehicle matching Shelia Eddy's car passing through around midnight, traveling in the direction of Blacksville, the same car that had picked Skylar up, traveling in the direction of a location where the girls' phones later showed they had been at a time they claimed to have been home asleep. The evidence was building. The story was unraveling. But investigators still needed the complete picture of what had happened. And for that, they needed one of the two girls to tell them. The investigation was about to reach its most consequential moment. And it came not through a forensic breakthrough or a dramatic confrontation, but through the weight of a secret that one person could no longer carry alone. Approximately 6 months after Skylar Neese disappeared, Rachel Shoaf's ability to maintain the performance collapsed. On December 28, 2012, she experienced a mental health crisis serious enough that her mother called 911. In the background of that call, Rachel could be heard in severe distress, screaming. She was taken to a local psychiatric hospital where she remained for 5 days. When she was released, Rachel Shoaf did not ask to go home. She asked to be taken immediately to her family lawyer's office. On January 3, 2013, Rachel Shoaf sat down with investigators and told them the truth. She had been present when Skylar died. She and Shelia had planned and carried out the attack together. She described the preparation, the supplies gathered in advance, the drive to Pennsylvania, the deliberate choice of a location all 3 of them had been to before. The moment when they told Skylar they had forgotten a lighter, the counting to 3, and everything that followed. The confession was devastating in its detail and in what it revealed about the cold premeditation that had preceded that night. This was not a crime of sudden anger. It was planned. It was prepared for. And it had been concealed behind 6 months of cooperative statements to investigators, social media posts designed to project normalcy. and the surface performance of two girls who had helped distribute missing person flyers for someone whose body they knew was in the woods of Pennsylvania. State Police Corporal Ronnie Gaskin later summarized the moment with a clarity that captures everything. "We asked Rachel, 'Why did you guys kill Skylar?' And her only answer to that was, 'We just didn't like her. They didn't like her. They didn't want to be friends with her anymore. That was the reason.' Not a violent altercation. Not a confrontation that spiraled out of control. They had grown bored with the friendship. They had decided, at some point in the preceding months, that the solution to not wanting to be friends with someone was to kill her. After her confession, Rachel Shoaf agreed to lead investigators to the location where Skylar's remains had been concealed. On January 16th, 2013, a body was found in Wayne Township, Greene County, Pennsylvania, less than 30 miles from Skylar's home. On March 13th, 2013, U.S. Attorney William Illenfeld confirmed that the remains had been identified as those of Skylar Neese. The autopsy documented over 50 stab wounds. She had been 16 years old. Investigators then moved quickly to build a case that went beyond Shoaf's testimony alone. A recorded meeting was arranged between the two girls, Rachel contacting Shelia while FBI agents monitored the conversation using hidden recording equipment. During the discussion, Shelia expressed confidence that investigators could not prove anything. She did not confess. She did not provide additional incriminating statements. But the recorded conversation itself became evidence documentation of two individuals who had committed the crime together, discussing it after one had already confessed. FBI Special Agent Rob Ambroini, who had administered a polygraph examination to Shelia earlier in the investigation, an examination whose results indicated deception, later reflected on the significance of that recorded interaction. Even without a direct confession from Shelia on that recording, the conversation captured to people who shared knowledge of the crime was evident in how they spoke about it. The critical physical evidence that allowed prosecutors to move forward conclusively was blood found inside Shelia Eddy's car. Testing confirmed it was Skylar Neese's blood. DNA evidence linking Skylar's blood to Shelia's vehicle, combined with Rachel's full confession, the phone location data, the gas station surveillance footage, and the recovered remains, gave prosecutors a comprehensive evidentiary case. On May 1, 2013, Rachel Shoaf pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was 17 at the time of the plea and agreed to be sentenced as an adult. Because of her cooperation with investigators, her full confession, her assistance in locating Skylar's remains, and her agreement to wear a wire in the attempt to record Shelia, she received a sentence of 30 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 10 years. Shelia Eddy's path to accountability took longer. On September 4, 2013, West Virginia prosecutors publicly identified her as the second perpetrator. She was indicted by a grand jury on charges including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. She initially pleaded not guilty, but facing the prospect of additional charges from Pennsylvania authorities, whose jurisdiction covered the location where the crime had actually occurred, and confronting the comprehensive evidence that had been assembled, Shelia Eddy pleaded guilty to first-degree murder shortly before her scheduled trial date. She expressed no remorse at sentencing. Judge Russell Clauges sentenced Shelia Eddy to life in prison with mercy, a West Virginia legal provision that, consistent with the Supreme Court's 2012 decision in Miller v. Alabama, required that a juvenile offender have the possibility of parole on a life sentence. Shelia became eligible for parole after 15 years, making her first potential parole date in 2028. Now let's step back and look at what this investigation tells us beyond the facts of the case itself, because the Skylar Neese case is not just a record of what happened on one night in Pennsylvania. It is a documented study in how deception works at scale, how evidence accumulates around a lie even when the lie is being maintained carefully, and what it costs psychologically to carry knowledge of something this serious for 6 months. For those 6 months, Shelia, Eddie and Rachel Shoaf maintained their performance in a community that was actively grieving and searching. Shelia called Dave Neese every day after Skylar disappeared. She asked for updates. She helped put up missing person posters. She participated in the search for someone whose body she had helped cover with branches in the woods of Pennsylvania. Dave Neese later said he thought Shelia genuinely cared. That is the magnitude of what the deception required and what it accomplished for almost half a year. But the investigation was closing in around them the entire time, not through a single breakthrough moment, but through the patient accumulation of evidence that individually seemed dismissible, but collectively became impossible to explain away. The timeline discrepancy on the security camera footage, the directional inconsistency in the route descriptions, the social media record of Skylar's expressions of fractured trust, the phone location data placing both girls in Blacksville at 4 in the morning when they claimed to be home asleep, the gas station footage showing Shelia's car traveling toward the location where the crime occurred, the blood in the car. Each piece added to a picture that became, eventually, undeniable. And it is worth examining what finally broke that picture open, because it was not an investigative confrontation that forced Rachel Shoaf to confess. It was the psychological cost of living with what she knew. 6 months of performing normalcy in a community that included Skylar's parents and everyone who had loved her. 6 months of being present in the social environment of a search for someone she knew was not missing. 6 months of carrying, in private, the complete knowledge of what had happened in those woods in Pennsylvania. The psychiatric crisis of December 2012 was the moment when the weight of that exceeded what Rachel Shoaf could contain. Her mother's 911 call, the hospitalization, the immediate request to go to a lawyer's office upon release. These were not the steps of someone maintaining a performance. They were the steps of someone for whom the performance had finally collapsed entirely. There is another element of this case that deserves direct attention, because it was only confirmed publicly in 2023 at Rachel Shoaf's parole hearing 11 years after the murder. The motivation that Shoaf had offered investigators in 2013, that they simply didn't like her anymore, was only part of the story. At her parole hearing, Shoaf confirmed what had long been speculated, that she and Shelia, Eddie, had been in a romantic relationship and had feared that Skylar would reveal that secret to others in their school and community. That fear of exposure of their relationship becoming known had been a driving factor in the decision to kill her. We found out finally, after 11 long years, what the real reason was. Dave Neese said publicly after the hearing. She was in a relationship with Shelia, Eddie, and they were both afraid Skylar was going to tell people. Skylar's father, who knew his daughter better than anyone, was clear about what he believed. Skylar would not have told. She was loyal. She had gay and lesbian friends, and it did not bother her. The girls who killed her had assigned her a threat she was never going to be. There is a detail in the court record from this case that is among the most disturbing elements in the entire documented history of what happened. Other students at University High School had overheard conversations between Shoaf and Eddie about the murder plot before July 6, 2012. They heard those conversations. They did not report them because they concluded that the girls must be joking. The possibility that the 16-year-old girls were seriously discussing killing their friend was not an interpretation anyone in their orbit reached, because it seemed like the kind of thing that could not be real. That is the gap that the Neese family chose to address in the aftermath of what happened to Skylar, not just through the law that bears her name, but through a broader commitment to education and advocacy. Dave and Mary Neese began speaking at schools, prisons, and churches, part of an outreach effort they call Skylar Talks. They encourage students to take what they call Skylar's Promise, a commitment to tell a responsible adult or guidance counselor about any concerns related to potential violence. Not to make students paranoid about their peers, not to create an atmosphere of surveillance, but to establish a simple, clear principle. If you hear something that concerns you, tell someone. Let a responsible adult make the determination of whether the concern is serious. Do not make that determination alone. Do not default to assuming the most alarming interpretation is impossible just because it is alarming. Because the Skylar Neese case demonstrates with devastating precision that the most alarming interpretation is sometimes the correct one. The legal legacy of this case extends beyond the sentences imposed on the two people responsible. When Skylar disappeared in July 2012, an Amber Alert was not issued because the circumstances did not meet all four required criteria. One of those criteria was that a child be believed to have been abducted, because Skylar had left through her window voluntarily, and because the initial assessment was that she might be a runaway. The criteria for an Amber Alert were not satisfied. The alert system also required a 48-hour waiting period before a teenager in those circumstances could be formally classified as missing. The idea that a 16-year-old could be in mortal danger and not trigger the full response of the alert system because of a technical gap in the criteria was something Skylar's parents refused to accept as a permanent condition. Following months of advocacy, working with state legislators, speaking publicly, making the case for why the criteria needed to change, the Neese family helped bring about the passage of what became known as Skylar's Law, signed into law by West Virginia Governor Earl Ray Tomblin. Skylar's Law modified the state's Amber Alert plan to require the immediate issuance of public announcements when any child is reported missing and believed to be in danger, regardless of whether the child is specifically believed to have been kidnapped. The West Virginia House of Delegates approved the legislation with a vote of 98-0. The Senate passed it unanimously. The law that carries Skylar's name has the potential to save lives precisely because it closes the gap that might have delayed a full response in her own case. As of 2026, Shelia Eddy and Rachel Shoaf both remain in custody at the Lakin Correctional Center in West Virginia. Rachel Shoaf has been denied parole twice, in 2023 and in 2024, and will be eligible for another hearing in June 2026. Her projected release date, if parole is eventually granted, is April 2028. Shelia Eddy will become eligible for parole in May 2028. Dave Neese has been unambiguous about his position on both. Following Rachel's 2023 parole hearing, he said, "This monster is a danger to society. If released, no parent can close their eyes at night without fear that their own child could possibly be the next victim." He also addressed the framing that emerged during that hearing, the suggestion that what happened was a mistake. She had every chance in the world to back out of that, and she chose not to. He said, "She didn't make a mistake. She made a choice." The case has received renewed attention in March 2026 with the debut of the three-part Hulu documentary series, Friends Like These, The Murder of Skylar Neese, directed by Claire Titley. The documentary uses archival footage, social media records, and police documentation to reconstruct the timeline. Integrates Skylar's own tweets and posts into the visual fabric of the series, placing them in the physical environments of the teenagers' lives, in hallways and on football fields and in the ordinary spaces where these girls existed, to give viewers a felt sense of what it was like to inhabit that world in 2012. The series includes new interviews and previously unreported details about both Shoaf and Eddie. It is a story that more than a decade after the crime still has new dimensions to explore, because the question of how teenagers could plan and carry out the murder of their closest friend and then spend 6 months pretending to search for her does not have a simple or comfortable answer. Now step back from the individual elements and look at the complete picture. Skylar Neese was 16 years old. She had a 4.0 GPA. She worked at Wendy's and never missed a shift. She wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. She had been friends with Shelia Eddie since she was 8 years old, nearly half her life. She trusted the people in that car with her completely. She left her window open because she planned to come back. She was hit with what happened with total surprise. Her father said he knows that. She thought these 2 girls were her friends and they were making amends maybe, he said. And they pull out kitchen knives and stab her over 50 times and then they lose count. Her name is on a law that protects children in West Virginia. Her parents speak at schools, prisons, and churches to make sure her story reaches the people who most need to hear it. Her memory is preserved in a roadside memorial in Pennsylvania, where her father goes to remember her. And here Storo told now in a documentary that brings new attention to a case that changed lives and changed law, is a reminder that the truth, however long it takes to emerge, does eventually surface. The investigation into Skylar Neese's disappearance is a model of what patient, methodical, evidence-based investigative work looks like when applied to a case that does not resolve quickly. The key steps: reviewing the apartment security footage, noting the timeline discrepancy, obtaining the phone records that placed both girls in Blacksville at 4 in the morning, identifying Shelia's car on the gas station camera, administering polygraph examinations, analyzing social media accounts were each individually insufficient to close the case, but together, accumulating over 6 months. They created a picture of inconsistency and deception that became increasingly difficult for the subjects to maintain. And Rachel Shoaf's confession, when it finally came, was not extracted by force or triggered by a single confrontation. It came because the psychological weight of living with what she had done in the presence of the people who loved Skylar, in a community searching for someone she knew was dead, finally exceeded her capacity to sustain the performance. 6 months of deception ended in a psychiatric ward, and then in a lawyer's office, and then in a confession that told investigators where to find Skylar Annette Neese. Skylar deserved that. Her family fought for it, and the legacy they have built in her name extends the meaning of her life far beyond the circumstances of her death. If this case matters to you, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this video with anyone who is following the Hulu documentary or anyone who wants to understand the complete story, told with the care and precision that Skylar and her family deserve. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What is the moment in this case that stays with you? What does this story tell us about trust and about the people we think we know? Skylar Neese was born February 10th, 1996. She left her window open behind her because she planned to come back. Her story is not over. It lives in the law that carries her name, in the promise that students take in her honor, in the memorial in Pennsylvania, and in the ongoing work of a mother and father who refused to let her death be the end of the story.